Welcome back everyone to Retro Rampage. Now, as some of you may have realized at this point, I like to spotlight games and hardware in these videos that I just find to be weird and obscure, and no game meets that description quite like Earthworm Jim, which to this day is still one of my favorite games of all time. Heck, I used to draw Jim in school instead of paying attention. That's how obsessed I was with this game. Created by Doug TenNapel and developed by Shiny Entertainment, Earthworm Jim was one of the many answers to the rise in mascot platformers first kickstarted by Sonic the Hedgehog. However, whereas many of these games were uninspired and tried too hard to have attitude, Earthworm Jim was comedic, over the top, and just incredibly fun to play. This first game spawned a franchise including action figures from Playmates Toys and a cartoon TV series that ran for 2 seasons, but it all started with this game here. Earthworm Jim was such a successful game that it was ported to nearly every platform that could handle it at the time, and even a few that couldn't. However, we should start at the beginning, as Earthworm Jim was originally programmed and meant for the Sega Genesis. The quirky, off-the-wall humor of Earthworm Jim begins with the game's story, although it's only present in the manual. In the far reaches of space, a bionic supersuit is constructed by Professor Monkey for a head with the intention of presenting it to an evil queen, making her the most powerful being in the universe. The suit is stolen, but the nefarious Psycho pursues the thief into our galaxy, where he destroys the ship, causing the suit to fall to Earth. The suit ends up landing on a normal Earthworm where it mutates into the hero Earthworm Jim. Realizing he is in control of the suit, Jim overhears Psycho talking to the Queen, as well as a mention of her imprisoned twin sister, Princess What's-Her-Name. Yes, that's a real name. Jim decides to track down this princess, and so the adventure begins. Right away, you can see the effort that was put in here. The sprites are incredibly smooth and well animated, especially Jim himself, who has a variety of poses and expressions. They were created by taking hand-drawn animation cells and converting them into a digital format, a process which some team members had used before when developing Virgin Games' Aladdin. The music, composed by Tommy Tallarico, is also of note, and it's awesome. The tracks all have a unique sound to them that fits the levels perfectly. Jim has a plasma blaster that he can fire in 8 directions, and larger plasma blasts can be found within the levels. Jim can also use his own worm body as a whip to swing from hooks or helicopter himself down from a great height. The adventure begins in New Junk City, but continues to other locales including Planet Heck, Bob the Killer Goldfish's underwater base, and Professor Monkey for a Head's secret lab. Between each level, you'll have to race Psycho to the next destination in Andy Asteroids. If you lose, you'll have to fight Psycho, which can cost you valuable health and ammo. After bungee jumping with Major Mucus, helping Peter Puppy get home on a dangerous escort mission, and navigating through the intestines of some thing, you reach the Queen's lair, Buttville. This level is filled with spikes and an incredibly dangerous descent at the beginning, but bring your A-game and soon you'll find yourself face to face with the evil queen, pulsating, bloated, festering, sweaty, pus-filled, malformed slug for a butt. Yes, that's her full name. And she's actually not hard at all, as long as you keep firing. After enough firepower, she explodes and Jim finally rescues the princess, only for her to get crushed by the same cow you launched back in New Junk City. And that, my friends, is Earthworm Jim. If I haven't made it obvious already, I love this game. I usually play through it in one sitting because it's just that fun, and those who played it at the time of its release agreed, so much so that the game would be ported to a ton of different platforms. Since the Genesis version was the first, this is what I'll use to compare all other versions of the game, the Control Earthworm Jim, if you will. Less than a month later, the Super Nintendo got in on the action with its own version of Earthworm Jim. This is an incredibly solid port, so much so that some people prefer this to the Genesis version. Some of the graphics and sprites look a bit different since the Super Nintendo runs at a different resolution than the Genesis. Also, the music and sounds are different due to the Super Nintendo's sound chip being radically different to the Genesis. I kinda like the sound of the Plasma Blaster firing better in this version. Jim's missing a lot of voice clips though. He says yippee for every item you pick up, whereas the Genesis had a unique line for each type of item. Yippee! Wham! Yippee! Whee! No! The compositions are the same, and they still sound great. This version does have some changes and things that were outright removed. Some of the levels have different backgrounds, most notably for Pete's sake, and this level is also missing the meteor showers that were an obstacle in the Genesis version. During the battle with Evil the Cat, there's this awesome background during both phases of the fight, whereas the Genesis version just took place in a black void. Intestinal distress was also completely removed from this version. That's it for the differences though, so it's still an excellent port. And hey, it made the cover of Nintendo Power, so that's a win in my book. The following year brought us a ton of new Earthworm Jim ports, including one for the Game Boy. Now you might ask, How can you fit all the smooth animation and detailed sprites of the game into a Game Boy cartridge? Let's find out. Well, the short answer is you can't. But that's not to say the game looks bad. Despite the graphical downgrade, Jim still animates fluidly, and even though the music is all 8-bit, it sounds awesome! The biggest problem with this version is that the Game Boy only has 2 buttons, so they mapped shooting and whipping to the B button. If you hold the button, Jim will shoot, while a quick press will do the whip. I had trouble getting used to this, and there's a delay before Jim starts firing. If you want to add color into the mix, this version was also ported to the Sega Game Gear. Both handheld conversions were handled by Eurocom, and they did an admirable job. The levels from the game are still recognizable, and it's still fun to make your way through the stages despite the control hiccups I mentioned. The breaking point for me, though, was the tube race and down the tubes. It is impossible in this version. They barely give you enough time to make it through, and the final passageway requires you to be pixel perfect. I couldn't get past this part no matter how hard I tried. Still an admirable port, though. In May of 1995, the Sega CD received its own version of the game, and this was special. So much so that it was named Earthworm Jim Special Edition. Packing in a bunch of new features and touching up existing ones, this is what many, including myself, believe to be the definitive version of the game. So now, let me show you what the leap to CD meant for Earthworm Jim. The extra effort is immediately apparent with this great pencil sketch intro of Jim. Let's go ahead and get the one and only negative out of the way: load times. Since we're on CD now, each stage is preceded by a short load screen. The load times are short and honestly not too bad, and each load screen gives you a look at the boss of the area you're about to enter. Right off the bat, some new graphical assets are present, and the music now uses Red Book audio. Tommy Tallarico is back to do the remixes, and they sound incredible. However, some of Jim's voice clips seem to be less clear in this version. Also, every impact or explosion sound effect has been replaced by what sounds like someone getting punched in the stomach. Jim has a new weapon he can obtain, a homing missile. This weapon can only be found in the first 2 levels of the game, but it packs a punch, tracking down the nearest target and taking most enemies down in one shot. New Junk City and What the Heck have also been extended, having new areas to explore towards the end of those levels. After What the Heck, we get to one of the best things about this version: a brand new level. Big Broody is a stage exclusive to the Special Edition, a rundown shack that Jim must traverse, luring this monster named Broody around to flick switches and make your way forward. This stage is a great addition to the lineup and is a ton of fun to travel through. Also, passwords! After each stage you're given a password so you no longer have to beat the game in one sitting. Once you get to the end of the game, you'll see that the animation on Jim has been improved tremendously, and there are now 3 different endings. Beat the game on difficult, and Doug TenNapel himself will congratulate you.
Boy, you've really whipped this game. I mean, you can put it back on the shelf. You've mastered it. I mean, on difficult. That's incredible.
Beat it on easy, and he'll bore you to death with a woefully inaccurate biology lesson.
All worms look just like elephants, with 2 ears and a long tail.
Overall, this is the best version of Earthworm Jim, no questions asked. You get the most content, the smoothest animation, the best music, and plenty of replay value. They even added a way to skip the annoying tube race and just play a bonus round of Anti-Asteroids instead. I have little to complain about with this special edition. However, it's not very accessible to newcomers. The Sega CD is kinda hard to find now, and the game itself is quite rare, having released the same month as the Sega Saturn in the US. And if you do get a Sega CD, these things break all the time, so some would argue it's not worth the effort. However, this isn't your only option to play the special edition. A few months later, the special edition was ported to Windows 95 with all the extra content intact. It might be difficult to get it running on a modern OS, but it's definitely worth the effort to try. The Sega CD and Windows 95 were the only platforms to get this special edition. Interestingly, Earthworm Jim would be ported to DOS by Rainbow Arts in 1996. This was part of a bundle called Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, The Whole Can of Worms. The graphics appear to be based on the Genesis version, but with a smooth, 256 color look that fits alongside other DOS games of the era. The CD soundtrack returns, and many of Jim's voice clips have cleaner audio quality here.
Groovy! Groovy!
It can be hard getting the game to run at a perfect frame rate, but you can always press F2 to make adjustments. Just like the Special Edition, this version comes with a password system so you can pick up where you left off. Unfortunately, it's missing 2 levels, Intestinal Distress, just like the SNES version, and the free-falling section of the Mecha Chicken fight. There are some other odd changes, like Billy the Bin having much less health and the Buttville themes being swapped. The CD-ROM also comes with a toy showcase, a low bitrate version of the cartoon intro, and a demo for Battle Arena Toshinden. This version is still sold digitally, while the Good Old Games version is completely intact. The Steam version reportedly lacks the soundtrack.
For serious gamers only, Earthworm Jim gives you more fun, so much more, that EGM and Die Hard Game Fan magazines have named it the best game of the year. More graphics, more groundbreaking visuals, using cutting edge and emotion, more special moves, more secret stages, more incredible characters, and more non-stop serious game action! So don't settle for less. Trust no one. Play it yourself.
Getting sick of Earthworm Jim yet? Well, I hope not, because here's something really weird. The Game Gear version of the game was ported to the Master System exclusively in Brazil by Tectoy. So let's check it out! Oh man. Well, the good thing is that the game is running at a higher resolution so you can see more on screen at once, but that's sadly where the positives end. You can really see the Master System struggling with this one. Frames drop constantly, and half the time it feels like my inputs aren't registering. Also, I didn't make it this far, but the game only has 4 levels. After Down the Tubes, it just cuts straight to Buttville. They didn't put in much effort on this one, so neither will I. The Game Gear version was far superior. That was it for Earthworm Jim ports for a few years, but in 2001, Majesco ported the game to the Game Boy Advance, so let's see how that turned out. Ugh, not very well. This port is based on the Super Nintendo version, but it doesn't run well at all. It runs at a lower frame rate and the animations are choppy. Also, screen crunch! Because of the lower resolution of the GBA screen, some stage elements are altered or moved around. This can make swinging around a real chore, and the control just doesn't feel as responsive because of it. The music sounds weird, certain tracks are even missing, and some voice clips are pitched up. Overall, this is a really lackluster port. The Game Boy version offered a better handheld experience. Just take me back to the Genesis version. That's much better. It would be another 8 years before Earthworm Jim came back into the public eye. Gameloft obtained the rights from Interplay to make their own versions of Earthworm Jim, leading to some new ports, beginning with the DSi. Yeah, remember the DSi? Gameloft's port of Earthworm Jim was pretty much a straight port of the Genesis original with a map function on the bottom screen. They did add some small mini-games which used the DSi camera. You'd need to mimic Jim's expression in order to earn some power-ups. This port performed well enough, and it helped introduce a new generation to the titular Worm hero. However, Gameloft didn't stop there, and they made arguably the most unusual port of this entire video. The Sega CD version has some competition. Earthworm Jim for mobile devices. I can't believe I just said that, but it's real. Sadly, it doesn't seem to work with my component cables, so just excuse the amateur cinematography for now. I'll make this quick. So remember all those unique moves and actions Jim could perform? Well, now each one is represented by a huge button in the corner of the screen, and in a game that involves precise diagonal inputs for shooting and whipping, a virtual D-pad does not cut it. You'll die a lot here just because of the touch controls. Jim's voice is way too high-pitched,
Plasma!
And the animations are ridiculously sped up. Look at the fight with Evil the Cat here. It's nearly impossible. I can't react fast enough before he attacks me. At least Intestinal Distress is here, but the game is missing everything from the Special Edition. Stay far away from this version, although you'd actually have to try to play this game now since it's been removed from the App Store. Finally, we get to Gameloft's final effort, Earthworm Jim HD. Released in 2010 for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, this remake was made based off the assets from the mobile version. They fixed Jim's voice and even added in the extended first 2 levels from the Special Edition, but there's still no Big Broody or homing missiles, and Who Turned Out the Lights was removed. Online multiplayer was also added, in addition to some new computer-themed levels that honestly would fit right into the original game. The music was remixed by Diego Zaldivar, with New Junk City's theme being based on the SNES port, and new tracks were added for the boss fights. This was a solid effort by Gameloft, but it still couldn't really compare to the original, so it drew a mixed response from fans. Gameloft's contract with Interplay expired in 2018, so all of their versions of Earthworm Jim are no longer available on digital storefronts. And that's it, everyone. That's every single version of Earthworm Jim. Now, there were a couple other re-releases, mostly of the Genesis version, including the Wii Virtual Console and the Sega Genesis Mini. And there's even another one coming up real soon for the upcoming Evercade. But I wanted to focus on the individual versions for each platform and what made them so different from each other. Personally, I find the Sega CD and Windows 95 version to be the best, with the Game Gear version being the best handheld entry. Actually, you know what? I have a Nomad. The Genesis version is the best handheld version. Fight me. The Earthworm Jim series has been quiet for nearly 10 years now, but that's looking to change soon. A graphic novel from Doug TenNapel was recently crowdfunded, and a brand new game was announced for the Intellivision Amico console, with the entire original team on board. Will this new game recapture the fun and humor of the original? We'll have to wait and see. There are a few other Earthworm Jim games in the franchise, so maybe I'll look at those in the future. But until then, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.